Hi, my name is Penny Powell, and I'm telling my quilt story at the Smoky Mountain Quilters Quilt Show, and today is June 21st, 2024. The name of this quilt is Coral Reef. It was made for my son and his now wife. They've been waiting on it for a year. I presented it to them and I said, you can have it or we can enter it in shows, and they were like, enter it in shows, and so I've entered it in several. The story behind the quilt is our family, we're scuba divers. And so the proposal came in Cozumel, Mexico on a scuba dive. So my intent was to recreate that moment, that day. So when you look at the quilt, it's supposed to remind you of the Caribbean waters and looking over the side of a dive boat and what you may see in the different formations. And you know, if you look at the quilt, the waters aren't all, or the colors aren't all the same. We have all these different variants of blues and greens, and that's how it is in the Caribbean. It's not just one fluid color or just one solid. It is more fluid, and you may look out in the horizon and see a different hue of blue. But anyway, I worked on it for less than a year. The pieced arcs I did at night, and then the rest of it, but the center was the heart of it, and it is to represent the reef. So that's the story of my quilt.
Hi, I'm Frances Al Smith, and I'm telling my quilt story at the Museum of the Cherokee Indian in Cherokee, North Carolina, and this is March the 18th, 2023. This quilt, I used to live in New Mexico and was a member of a quilting bee called Quilts Anonymous, and this was one of our group quilts. So it's called Houses and Trees, and it was, everyone got a different pattern, and I think however many are in here, what is that, 12 of us, each had to do 12 of our pattern, and this was my pattern down here. So this is my house and this is my tree, and then we did an exchange, like a cookie swap exchange. Everyone got one of mine, and I got, all 12 got one of mine, and I got, one of these, whatever. You get the idea. But it was one of the first group quilt challenges I ever did, and I was very young in my quilting back then, and the other ladies were much more experienced, I felt. But it was really fun to do, and it was interesting to see that, we got a flag here at the church, whatever. This lady decided she'd put quilt shop on hers. It wasn't part of the pattern, but they used their individuality to enhance some of their work. And one of my things I did, I put little birds down here near the chimney, little chimney sweeps. And it's fun to go back in time. I think this was made maybe in 1997 or something like that. And to see the names of my old friends back in New Mexico. It's all pieced, and then I put a piano key border around the edges, and I did have it machine quilted. You can see the pattern in the machine quilting. But it was a fun thing to do, and it brings back lots of good memories from my time in New Mexico.
My name is Angie Lamry. I am telling my quilt story at the Community Center Day, at the Community Quilt Day in Leicester, North Carolina. Today is Sunday, April 23rd, 2023. This is a quilt pattern that I wrote called Love Fills the Spaces. It was designed as a wedding quilt, and the way it's supposed to work is you have a negative space on both ends. You choose two colors that represents two people. You're floating around in the world as you're learning about yourself. Out there, you grow as yourself, you grow together as a couple, and then the row in the center has no negative space left where the world is no longer involved in your relationship. This particular version of this quilt was made by my friend Eva Jobin. I designed the quilt, I quilted the quilt, and then I turned it into a wall hanging version that is half-size logs. So this quilt is the wall hanging version of this quilt. These are 1-inch finished logs. These are 1/2-inch finished logs. So if math confuses you, this is why. This is the wall hanging version that I made. It's the exact same pattern. The only difference is these are 1/2-inch logs. So if you don't want to make a bed quilt, you can make it as a wall hanging instead. I absolutely love the geometric shape to this. I had a lot of fun working with 60-degree equilateral triangles. It was just a really fun challenge for me. I made the original version of the quilt for my brother and sister-in-law about 6 years ago in teals and greens. So now we've made this quilt in about 6 different colorways, and every colorway comes together, so it doesn't matter which color you choose to represent the two people. The magic happens in the negative space. So this has been a labor of love for me for multiple reasons, not only making it for people that I love, but watching other people make the same pattern for people that they love. I'm a big proponent that quilting is good for your mental health. Quilting is one of my love languages, so I want to help other people learn how to make quilting their love language as well. So this is my version.
Hi, my name is Anne-Marie Miro, and I'm telling my quilt story at the Smoky Mountain Quilters Quilt Show today, June 22nd, 2024. My quilt here is called Flowers from Kansas. I actually bought the quilt top on eBay. I have no clue who made the top. When I got the top, I realized it was meticulously put together, and it became my mission to complete this quilter's journey. So at today's show, I have completed her journey. She has won an honorable mention, and I will be putting the quilt up for sale, and her half of the money will be going to an education fund.
My name is Jacqueline McKinstry, and I'm telling my quilt story at the Quilts of Valor 20th Anniversary Conference in Paducah, Kentucky. Today is September 14th, 2023, and this is my 11th year in my journey with Quilts of Valor. They originally started when my friends were awarding wounded veterans at Fort Rucker with Quilts of Valor, and we got all excited and interested and started. And I needed something to do because my husband and my son were both deployed to Afghanistan at the same time. It was the 3rd combat tour for my son and the 5th for my husband in over 30 years. He went in 1982. They're both Apache pilots. And so it's been very stressful, and I needed something. So the Quilts of Valor filled the bill. I volunteered when a friend of mine retired just as a volunteer. And long story short, 2016, on 4th of July, I decided to take the state coordinator job for Alabama, and it has been delightful. We have awarded so many quilts, all the veteran stories. I've done my mom's best friend who was a POW in the Hanoi Hilton, so I always have to call the other state coordinators and say, I'm coming to Wisconsin, I'm coming to Minnesota to award relatives and friends. That was amazing. One of the first Navy SEALs, I awarded him a quilt, and my favorite thing, I've been working on my uncle's quilt trying to design it, and so this Christmas I'm going to award my uncle who was in Vietnam. He was in intelligence, and a lot of what he did he can't talk about, but he was a Bronze Star recipient, and he was just one of my heroes besides my mom's friend. And so I just finished his quilt. It's a mixture of 3 different quilt teachers, and I just got the idea. I've been drawing it for 3 years, and it's finally done, so I'm very excited. But this weekend I've got a couple I'm awarding on Friday night, and the 15 veterans coming for the annual Wounded Warrior Hunt at Fort Novosel on Saturday. So I'm very excited to just keep going. Another 11 years.
Hello, I'm Joshua Dunn. I am in Raleigh, North Carolina on February 22nd here at QuiltCon. I am here to tell you about this quilt behind me. It is not a quilt I made myself, it's one I had finished. It was pieced by my mother. She used a Brother sewing machine to put it together. She was more into the quilt work though by hand, so this is really unique to her style. I don't have a name for it, so I've been affectionately calling it Stars in Every Corner. My favorite part is that I remember her piecing all of these stars, or at least most of these stars, on her sewing machine. These are leftover scraps from other projects that she's done over time. The reason this quilt holds so much, I guess, legacy and warmth for me is that it wasn't just myself that really brought it to the finish line. It was a community of quilters. There was a long arm quilter in Haw River, the Stitchmeister quilter. Gail Von Hone is her name, who did the Panto quilt pattern here. And then to do the binding on the quilt was my local quilt shop, Calla Lily Quilts. The quilter was Anna. So it really just brought all these hearts together to really get this quilt to this beautiful, special hug that I can have for the rest of my life. I will remember my mom very affectionately, not just for the quilt that she made, the warmth this will bring me for years now. Thank you so much for listening to my quilt story, and I hope you like Denise Gunter's quilt.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Coviello, and I live in Saugus, Massachusetts, and I belong to Nimble Thimblers in Wakefield. I've been a member about 2 years now, and the ladies haven't got to see this quilt yet because I've been a little shy at showing it. But I made it. I was inspired to make it for my mother because she loved to garden, and reminded me of all her beautiful flowers, and us sitting at the table watching the stars at night and spending time with her. It's cotton with a wool applique, the buttonhole stitch on it, and it was very fun picking out all the colors and seeing how all the harmony. It was my first scrappy quilt I ever made, and I'm very, very proud of it. And I love to show it off.
My name is Laura Garrett, and I'm telling my quilt story here in Tahlequah, Oklahoma at the Cherokee National Holiday Quilt Show today, August 30th, 2024. I started sewing years and years ago, but like many moms, I had to put it aside while I raised my kids, and my daughter graduated in May and asked me to make a quilt for her, which is another quilt I entered in the show. And it just reminded me how much I enjoyed sewing, and since she had graduated I had more time on my hands. And then the holiday theme came out and I just really liked it. The colors and the design was so beautiful, and so I decided to see if I was creative enough to kind of replicate it and put my own touch to the design. So I created this quilt. The background is woven into a herringbone pattern. The medallion was printed on fabric and then painted, hand painted the rope and the circles and each of the masks and the flower medallion, and then the weave work is done with hand embroidery. The spider was created by hand piecing each different color of fabric and then zigzag stitching them together with a blanket stitch around the outside to outline the spider, and then a double blanket stitch in a cream color to attach it to the quilt itself. So a lot of precision stitching on the machine. The corners were each done, pieced, and then outlined with black bias tape, which is called a stained glass technique. And then the borders are woven bias strips with handmade curved bias binding for the hoops. And then the stars I actually tried 3 different techniques to try to come up with the star and get it to turn out nice. First tried piecing each piece, but they were so small I couldn't hang on to them very well to get them attached correctly. But what I landed on was the gold star and then a tan star, and I cut away the parts I wanted to show through, and then the stitching pulled it all together. So that's kind of how I came up with the quilt. I think I put in about 250 hours into it, about 2 months. I work full-time in accounting for the tribe, and every night and every weekend I spent numerous hours putting it together, but it was a lot of fun. It was a challenge, and I'm happy it turned out so well.
So my name is Sandra Jones, and I'm telling my quilt story at a Community Day Quilt in Hazard, Kentucky. Today is Saturday, May 27th, 2023. This quilt is called The Liberation. The colors, it's very colorful. Africa is very colorful, known for being very colorful. And this is an authentic African block here. And we use the theme Pan-African colors. So these are colors that are typically the most popular colors, the typical colors that you would see in an African flag, but we used brighter fabrics for it. And we used this, it's called onion ring fabric, to kind of just add some design and personality to it. It's more simple than the other one that we did. Not as large, but we had a lot of fun doing this quilt. And from that workshop, we've got like 5 or 6 other people who are wanting to make their own quilts now. So, but pretty simple story behind this one. So that's really about it. But we do have, I did use the back. It's kind of like its own quilt. So it's like 2 quilts in one, kind of. So that's that one.
My name is Jennifer McKinney, and I'm telling my quilt story at the Smoky Mountain Quilters Quilt Show. Today is June 22nd, 2024. Back when I was in middle school, I wanted to take shop, but they wouldn't let me because I was a girl. I would have been really good at shop. So I had to take home ec, and one of the things we had to do was to sew a dress. I had no idea how to do anything. Every single step, I asked the teacher what to do. At the end, the dress fit perfectly, but it was sewn inside out. So I decided sewing wasn't for me. 50 years later, I read a book about quilting and quilters, and it sounded really fun. So I got my graph paper out and drafted my first quilt. It took me a year to do a queen-size bedspread, and I hand quilted it, and I really wanted to continue. That was on my 58th birthday in 2010. I usually like to make my own quilts, whatever's in my head, but I saw this sheep pattern and just fell in love. It's a Corey Yoder pattern from Coriander Quilts, and so I decided to make a bunch of them. I ended up making 14 of the sheep, and turns out only one of them was sewn correctly. I had a real hard time sewing them. At the end, they were all different sizes, and to put them together, I had to take some off, add some fabric, but I think I did a really good job in putting it together, making it all fit. Can you tell which one is the one that's not like the others? This is the only correct one. All the other stars are at the bottom. I had no problem drafting the barn. I did that on graph paper and did that without a problem. And I've discovered it's not that I can't sew, it's I can't follow directions.
Hi, I'm Becca Prophet, and I'm telling a quilt story at the McKinney Center in Jonesboro, Tennessee. Today is Saturday, May 6, 2023, and I have brought with me a quilt from the Reese Museum's permanent collection that was made by Margaret Gregg. She is a local artist, and I know many of us know her in the room today. She does amazing work, still very active in our community, and I wish she could be here to share. Hopefully she'll come another day and tell the story herself. I'll do my best to speak for her today. This was a quilt that started out as a traditional kind of made in the 1960s pattern. You can see kind of behind the work that Margaret did over it. She over-dyed that original quilt, and you can see where some of the fabric's kind of coming apart a little bit. And so in order to save it, I think was her original idea, she over-dyed it, and then over top of that original quilt she's added patchwork squares and different shapes that she has screen printed on. So there's different messages on the quilt, I wish I knew more about the story of what the purpose, like what the message that she was really intentionally trying to give us with this quilt. But I think we can just look at it and see all the different, you know, Mother Jones and the figures that are on the quilt, and kind of maybe start to understand it a little bit. But I don't know what else to say about it. It's a beautiful piece of art, and Margaret's very talented.
My name is Frances O'Rourke Dow, and I'm telling my quilt story at the Asheville Quilt Show in Asheville, North Carolina. Today is Thursday, September 28th, 2023. This is my quilt. It's called Sit-In, and I made it in 2017. It's inspired by a drawing by an artist named Beverly Buchanan. I saw Buchanan's work at an exhibit at the Nasher Museum in Durham, which is where I live, and the work that I saw there was sculptural, but I loved it so much that I went home and Googled her and did a deep dive into her work. She's an African-American artist who was born in the 1940s and died in 2015. And a lot of her work is sculptural, but she had, as I was doing my deep dive, I found a drawing that she had drawn of a chair, and it was a rustic chair. It looked very much like this, and it was a pencil drawing, but she had colored it in with bright pink and orange colored pencils, and it was just super cool. She's an amazing artist, and I thought, you know, it'd be very cool, because I had just started exploring kind of modern applique, would be make a huge chair and put it on a white background. I mean, I like a bigger than life chair, but and applique it on and make a quilt out of it. First of all, I couldn't figure out how I would make that template, so I thought maybe I will start with a small chair and practice, and that's what I did. And then using her drawing, I made an acrylic template and started making these chairs. And each one is on, I measured today, it's like the white panel that's about 8, I think is 10 by 2. And so I make a chair and applique it and put it on my design wall. And my first thought was I would do it like Warhol's soup cans, just rows. But as I started putting them on, they called for some negative space. And I also, they were like in these groupings. And what was interesting about making this quilt, as I put more chairs on the design wall, is like the quilt continually took on new meanings, because at first it was like a couple people gathered and having tea, and then it was like the wallflowers at the dance once I finished one row, but then it became like a PTA meeting, and then it was the show, and then it was the tent revival, and so just with each row it kind of told me a different story. And as I was searching for a name, my friend Jen Greer, who's a quilter, suggested Sit-In, which I loved and seemed perfect, and of course that added yet another layer of meaning to the quilt. And I don't know that you can see it in the video, but in these white spaces I quilted chairs, and I call them my ghost chairs, which again, I'm a writer, and like, so more meaning, more stories. And then around on top and on the bottom, I quilted the word "sit by me, sit by me, sit by me," and it was such a joy to make. And it's probably, I feel like it's with my kids. I don't want to say I've got a favorite, but this is my favorite child. Now I'm taking it out. And so anyway, so I loved making it, and I did. By the way, it is labeled, and on the label I did give Beverly Buchanan credit for the illustration that was based on her illustration. So thank you, and thanks for giving me the chance to tell the story.
Hi, I'm Michelle Muska, and I'm in my home studio in Enfield, Connecticut, and it's Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2024, and I'm here to tell you a quilt story. And it's a story about this quilt, not one that I made, but one that my great aunt Sadie made. She's from Corina, Maine. She was born in 1878, and she passed away in 1973. Her name was Sarah Lovely Mullen, and everyone called her Sadie. Known as kind of a quiet, sweet woman and very frugal. So apparently this is the only quilt that she made. Her sister, Mercy, was the quilt maker of the family and won many prizes throughout country fairs in Aroostook County, Maine, and all over, actually, the state. But this one quilt has been handed down. I'm not sure how it quite got to my mom, and she has entrusted it to me. And it was dated for, I think, about 1930 by Mary Kay Waldvogel at an event some years ago. And Mary Kay was very excited when she saw this quilt. And I really wasn't quite sure why, because it's old, it's pretty simple, it doesn't have a lot of fancy fabrics in it, you know. Sadie was the country wife of a sheriff, so, you know, she had the typical clothes of the day. And there was a few pieces of velvet, and it's machine pieced, and then it does have hand stitching around it, mostly the feather stitch. There are some chain stitching stitches around and around the border, but it was the back that she was really interested in. So let me just talk about the binding a little bit. It is pieced. This is a cotton rayon blend, and you'll see over here is taffeta, which I think could possibly be from a coat lining. And I don't know, this to me looks like a drapery fabric up here. So as I said, she used what she had. But the interesting part that Mary Kay thought was the back of the quilt, which was made up of really large blocks. This creamy satin, and here's a typical print from that time of the rayon dresses, and it is pieced many, many times. There's small pieces here and here to make up a block that's as large as these blocks on the front. And I think it was this piece in particular, this really large floral print, that she thought was very different and unusual for a dress print at that time. And it is tied as well. It has a very thin piece of fabric in the middle. This quilt will be hanging at QuiltCon in the Quilt Alliance booth, and between February, I think, 22nd and 25th. I hope you will stop by to see it if you're there. And thank you for letting me do a Go Tell It with my Aunt Sadie's beautiful quilt.
Hi, I'm Nancy Hayes, and I'm telling my quilt story at the Sandymush Community Center in Leicester, North Carolina. Today is Sunday, April 30th, 2023. So I wanted to bring this quilt to share because it was Patrick's baby quilt that was made by Betsy. And I just thought it was really fun. And also, Betsy was one of Patrick's fairy godmothers. He had 3 fairy godmothers. And my other friend Michelle, who's here, is another. Oh, there she is, Michelle. She's here too. And she was part of the three fairy godmothers. So I want Betsy to talk about her inspiration. And Patrick was born in 1989, so that's when it was made.
Nancy and I were working together at the library at UNCA, and Michelle also was working with us at that time, and Nancy and I were on the exhibits committee. We we like decorating things, and so I was so excited about Patrick's coming, and I wanted to, and then just excited about making something. So it was an excuse to make something and try out this kind of patchwork that I had read about. And out the door of the library, you stood on the steps of the library and you saw Mount Pisgah. So that was the mountains. And then the balloon idea was Patrick and life. And
life.
And the sun became a spider web, and that was how the quilting happened, and with some clouds. So that worked out well.
My name is Tammy Wessel. I'm telling my quilt story at the Smoky Mountain Quilters Quilt Show in Knoxville, Tennessee. Today is June 21st, 2024. This is Letters from Linda. It's a memory quilt honoring my mother, Linda Lee Houghton Wessel Arsenault. While we were cleaning out her house, my aunt, her sister, insisted I take all the shirts that I'd made for her over the years. And her shirts are the flaps of all of the envelopes, because she loved celebrating every holiday. You can see we've got St. Patrick's Day and the 4th of July and a bunch of other holidays in here, along with anything seaside she absolutely loved, and her flip-flops and just all kinds of themes that she loved, along with anything purple, hence the backgrounds and the borders. And I hung on to the shirt for a number of months trying to find a pattern that was appropriate, and this showed up, and I'm like, this has got to be it, because it not only let me use little pieces of all of these, but she was a rural mail carrier till the day she died. Yeah, absolutely. This is actually one of 3 quilts of this size. I made one for my brother, I made one for my aunt, and I made one for my husband and myself. There are also 3 wall-hanging versions, one for each of her granddaughters, my daughter, my brother's daughter, and for a friend of hers from Florida who helped us immensely when she died very unexpectedly. So I made lots and lots of these envelopes, and it showed me just how many shirts I had made for her over the years that I was able to do that many pieces out of these. And I love this quilt. It's my everyday quilt. It is on the bed every day and just keeps a piece of my mom with me.
Hi, I'm Kelly Spell. I'm from Hickson, Tennessee, and I'm here at QuiltCon in Raleigh, the MQG's annual event. Today is Friday, February 23rd, and this is my quilt called Candy Pop. It is a design that I made in the past year. It is similar style to quilts that I make often. I usually work with circles and swirls. I am inspired by hydroelectric water turbines that pump water and help create energy where I live in Tennessee, thanks to the Tennessee Valley Authority. And so I wanted to play with this idea of a giant swirl making its way around a number of circular turbines. And so I drew this design, and as I was playing around with colors in Illustrator, I happened to accidentally click the wrong color, and it made the circles the same color as the swirl, and I was like, man, I really like that. So that was kind of exciting, and then I was staring at all the piecing, and I know now that generally anything I can draw, I can piece, but this was a bit of a puzzle, and so I had to stare at it for a long time and seek some help from friends to figure out what order to put all of these pieces together. It's probably hard for some of you to see at home in this video, but this single swirl is about 18 feet long. It comes down the first column of circles and winds its way back up and all the way back around down to this side. And so how the heck do you piece that? And so I printed out a picture. There are lots of partial seams, and so I drew on the picture, like, this is a seam, this is where I would leave a partial seam, this is when I would connect the swirl and how I would move down. And so I'm really pleased with the outcome. All of this fabric is hand dyed or hand printed. So I screen printed the background print and the print in these pink segments here, and then the red is just solid, and the back is also hand dyed. And so it was a really ambitious project. It was probably the most ambitious quilt I've ever made, and having it recognized as the best original modern design here at QuiltCon was just icing on the cake. That I love it. I managed to pull it off and get it together and piece all of these crazy pieces, and to have everyone else love it also is just really exciting. And so I'm glad to be here and share it with all of you.
My name is Lori Thompson, and I'm telling my quilt story at the Quilts of Valor 20th Anniversary Conference in Paducah, Kentucky. Today is September 14th, 2023. And it's particularly special for me because I'm serving as the executive director currently for the organization. And it's been a privilege to meet quilters across the U.S. and wrap our service members and veterans. I'm excited to tell my quilting story. I came into quilting later. I was a garment sewer for years, 4-H kid who learned how to sew, studied clothing and textiles in college, and then went a different direction. And then got into quilting 7 years ago when my friend got a long arm. So I have to credit the long arm for getting me into quilting. Once my friend had the long arm and quilting felt easier, I was hooked. I just didn't want to do quilts on a domestic machine. That was a little intimidating. So I quilted happily with her help for 4 years, and then she moved out of state, and then it was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So I was also at a crossroads at that time in my life where I had taken a break from my nonprofit career and was pursuing craft classes and things like that to teach and build into a business, and then the pandemic hit. So in September 2020, I had a decision to make around that time. Was I going back to work for a nonprofit, or was I buying a long arm? And my husband says, buy the long arm first, and the rest has been history. It's opened up a completely new world for me. One of my quilting friends asked me, she said, everybody bought a Peloton and you bought a long arm. And I said, yeah. She goes, you got the better deal. And so here I am 3 years later on that journey, which led me to my role with Quilts of Valor. I had a nonprofit background in quilting, and just randomly found the posting 2 years ago and applied, and here we are. And it's just been a great journey all the way around with Quilts of Valor and with long arming, and it's just opened up a whole new community for me. My long arm that I have an Innova M24 with the autopilot, so I say I'm a digital quilter. I don't do any free motion, anything like that. But you know, for me, it's really fun to get the computer going, get the machine going, and connect with other quilters and help them finish their quilts, and also quilt some Quilts of Valor. My long arm is named Roxy. I'm in the Denver area, so Roxy has altitude and attitude, and she's a tough cookie. But it's been great to just make my own quilts and work with others to have their quilts come to life. So the quilt that I'm going to share is a Quilt of Valor that I made for my uncle, Colonel Noel Keller. He served in the Marine Corps, lifelong career, and it was a privilege to present that to him in April of 22. And yeah, it was fun. I got to piece it from the beginning and used a great pattern from one of our members, long-armed it, and it was just amazing to present it to him. And of course put a Quilt of Valor label on it and went through the ceremony in California.
Hi, my name is Jean Hansen, and I'm a member of the Nimble Thimblers Quilt Guild in Wakefield, Mass. And this quilt will be in the September 2024 quilt show. This quilt came about because of our lockdown and COVID. I had a number of unfinished projects, but why should I do that when I can go and look for fabric in my closet? So I found this little kit, and I looked at it, and then I remembered why it was in the closet, because it comprised of 7-inch squares that needed to be cut down to 4-inch squares and 2 3/4-inch squares, and then ultimately smaller triangles. So that didn't suit me at the time. But this time I looked at it and I said, I think this would be something good. So I spread it on my cutting board, and methodically I read the directions, left it out, cut it. It took me a while, but I wasn't in any rush, and I pieced it, and as I pieced it, I found out my points actually were going to match. I said, okay, we can continue, and I put it together, and when I looked at it, I knew I wanted to finish it, but I also knew that nobody was going to quilt it at that time. So I tried, and I just straight quilted it and finished it off, finished the binding, and I'm really happy with the way it came out. So I can use it either as a wall hanging, or I can use it as a something to decorate my table.
All right, my name is Jane Tyner, and I'm telling a quilt story at the Smoky Mountain Quilters Quilt Show today. And today is June 22nd, 2024. The quilt I brought today is a quilt that I made relatively recently, and it's called Elm Street. It's a memory quilt. Elm Street, for Dad with Love, Jane Ryman Tyner Jane Ryman Ward Tyner. I had to get all the names in there so I could be traced. 2021. I started this quilt in 2018 when my mom passed away. I wanted to give my dad a memory quilt. So every fabric in here is a memory or a story or is a reminder of a story, something somebody said or did that's goofy. I went with the log cabin because that was the pattern that my mother's mother used all the time. And the fireplace in our home was very much the center of our home. So I wanted to use the log cabin, but I put it in the dahlia format because my dad grew and bred dahlias in the backyard. So I made it into a flower print. And it took me about 1.5 years. And then I had to hurry up at the end when my dad was diagnosed with cancer, brain cancer. And then I added a row on the bottom so that it could fit on his hospice bed. And he got to enjoy it for a good 6 months and loved it, absolutely cherished it. And that made me the happiest girl on earth.
My name is Seal Christensen Duncan. And I'm telling the story of how we found these quilt blocks that belong to my husband's mother. My husband's native Cherokee from Barren Fork, Oklahoma. And all of these blocks were in an old trunk that we discovered about 3 years ago and decided, hey, we need to put this together and hang on to it for history. And I thought, well, is it okay if I entered in the quilt show too? Well, apparently it was okay to enter in the quilt show. My husband's mother was Florence Duncan, and this is her right here. And these are all his aunts and ladies of Adair County and from Barren Fork, Oklahoma.
My name is Sally Williams. My maiden name is Clausen, and my mother's family was scrapers. And today I was looking at all the beautiful quilts in this show and came across one that just really stunned me because I started looking at the blocks and realized that several of the names were my family. And now I'm going to cry. And long since gone, of course, but the story behind it we really don't know other than the blocks were found someplace and pieced together later. So there's not a lot more to say other than a couple of them are my great aunts, and there's one of my aunt, and her name was Lula Gibbons, and she was quite instrumental in this group, I'm thinking, because I've seen history of it before, and she did a lot of promotion in the arts and the crafts of that era, and got groups together and taught, and she did a lot of stuff like that. At one time, she designed this purse that was made with little tiny cedar blocks. And apparently, in this history that I've got, she sold that far and wide, even overseas. So that's pretty cool too. So, but yes, it was quite a shock and very heartwarming, you know, just something that I never expected at all. I just came to see the beautiful quilts.